Alrighty. Well, good morning, everybody. It's kind of cool in here today. Um, there's Rocky. There he is. Hello, Rocky. Him's quite beautiful. Anyway, I was thinking of something just now and kind of drawing a parallel to, my goodness, drawing a parallel between, between a couple of things. And I'm going to tell you what conclusion I've come to based upon what I'm thinking about it anyway. Okay, there you go. He's very heavy, this cat. Oh, he's a big boy. But yeah, anyway, Rocky's kept me up most of the night because he's been agitated about whatever's going on. Yeah, hey, something's gone on outside. I don't know what, but we'll see. We'll see shortly what's going on outside, eh? You and I will go out together and we'll investigate, is what we'll do. We will. Anyway, okay, go ahead. Okay, there we go. Quite the cat, I'll tell you. I got my hot water bag under here, under the blankets there. It's actually still quite warm. It is. Yeah. It's putting out some good heat, keeping me all toasty warm in my bed, even though it's cold. But what I want to talk to you about is something that I experienced about 25 years ago. It involves a couple of corrupt Ontario provincial police officers, the OPP as they're called here, in Ontario, our provincial police force. And I want to make a parallel between that and between what Jesus experienced. Now, I want to make it clear I'm not comparing myself to Jesus in any way. I'm not, except that I've seen something that I believe he saw. That I experienced something in dealing with corrupt authority figures that I believe he experienced regularly. According to Scripture, at least, he did. And I'm going to explain where I'm going with this. But, like John the Baptist said, he said, I'm not fit even to loosen his sandal straps. I'm not even fit to loosen his sandal straps. That's what John the Baptist said. And that's what I say too. I'm not even fit to loosen his sandal straps. So I just want to make that clear anyway at the outset. But about 25 years ago, I had two members of the Ontario Provincial Police attempt to frame me for break and enters that were happening in Tay Valley Township, which is a township outside of Perth, Ontario, anyway, Canada. And I want to explain that they were trying to frame me. They didn't sincerely believe I was guilty. They knew I wasn't. But they needed to put a body in the prison. And they didn't want to put the man who was committing these crimes in the prison. These break and enters that were happening in Tay Valley Township. And the reason for that is that man was an informant. He was passing information to them about other criminals, basically. And so he was of use to them. He'd be of no use to them behind bars. But they were under pressure to solve the case. Somebody had to go to jail, and they decided that somebody was going to be me. And so they targeted me. Now, I don't have any history of thieving and breaking and entering and stuff. That's not something I do. But still, I was in the area a lot. I spent a lot of time in Tay Valley Township. And so they thought that they had me, basically. They thought they were going to build some sort of a circumstantial case against me and blame me for these break-ins. Well, I had a run-in with them. It was in the wintertime, these two cops. They were following me around. It wasn't the first time they had followed me. And I decided, because I'm a man and not a milksop, like most are these days, I decided I was going to find out why they were following me. And so what happened is I lost them. They were following me and I lost them, but I knew that they'd be down the road waiting for me. Just by the way things happened, I knew that. And I was right. When I came into the town of Perth on the Scotch line, they had pulled into the driveway of a public utilities shed. There's a shed there on the right-hand side when you come into Perth, and it belongs to the Perth Public Utilities Commission. And the driveway there hadn't been plowed. It was full of snow, and that's what they pulled into. Well, I went past them and I pulled over onto the shoulder of the road and I stopped and I got out of the car and I stood there beside the car just looking at them, waiting for them. Well, they were stuck. They were stuck. The wheels were spinning and everything, you know. I was just about to go over and offered to give them a push. Would you like me to get behind this thing and push you out of here? But I didn't do that anyway, but I was, thought crossed my mind, you know, because I'm a smart aleck. Anyway, eventually they got out and they pulled in behind me, and we had this confrontation. And they were accusing me of doing these break-ins around Tay Valley Township, and of course I was denying it. And at one point, one of the cops, he got up in my face. He was all puffed up, you know, very proud, eh? These guys, they're very proud. You know, pride is one of the greatest sins, eh? Because it leads to so many other sins. And it's also the original sin that's what Lucifer is guilty of, is pride. He said, I'm better than God. I'm going to sit on the throne. People are going to worship me, you see. And then he tried to overthrow God. That didn't work out well for him, but that's what he tried to do. See, that's all pride that's behind that. So pride is like the mother of all other sins, because pride, all sin was kind of birthed through pride when you look at it. Sin came into the world that way. Anyway, he was all puffed up and he gets right up in my face on the side of the road. And he says, I don't believe your story. And my response to him was, what do you want from me? I have no control over what you believe. Well, when I said that, I saw how he was deflated. It brought him right down. Because how do you answer that? How could he answer that question, or that statement? It wasn't a question, really. It was a rhetorical question, I guess. But how can you answer that statement and still push your agenda in that situation? He couldn't, you know. I'd given him the perfect answer. It's the only time in my life that I ever gave a cop the perfect answer. A corrupt police officer, where I actually basically outsmarted a corrupt police officer and gave him the perfect answer. Only time I've ever done that. Now, Jesus did that repeatedly with the Jewish authorities, not the Roman authorities so much, but the Jewish authorities who were out for him, who were out to get him, you know. I just did it once. But in doing it that one time, I saw what Jesus must have saw when he did it repeatedly. Because I saw that cop, it deflated him. He was up in my face and he was all puffed up, you know, and it completely deflated him. Just for a second, it deflated him. And then I saw the anger rise up within him. And I saw he was reinflated with anger, you see. And he was furious. Because who was I? To him, I was no different than a pile of dog shit on the sidewalk. You know? to him. And so who was I, somebody who was so inferior to him, to answer him that way? To answer him in a way that he could not reasonably respond and still promote his agenda, still promote the thing that he was promoting. Anyway, the anger rose up inside of him and he said, "This conversation is over." Just like that. And I said, "Yes, it is." And he went back to his car with his partner and they left anyway, and I left. But of course, after that, he really had it in for me. He hated me with a passion, probably still hates me. Because in that moment, me, who he considered inferior to him to the point where he had a right to knowingly frame me up and put me in prison for things I hadn't done in order to further his own agenda, to keep his informant out of prison, and so his informant could continue passing information to him about other criminals and help him to advance in his career. That's how little he thought of me. He basically thought of me as a disposable person. He thought he had a right to do what he was doing to me. And here I, in that moment at least, was a smarter and better man than he was. And proved it. And that drove him crazy. That enraged him. It deflated him, and then it enraged him. Now, where I'm going with this, though, is I think Jesus must have saw that repeatedly. I was only ever smart enough in this life to do that once. One time I gave a corrupt police officer the perfect answer. And I saw that process of deflation and reinflation with rage occur. Jesus, of course, he had the authorities coming after him, these corrupt authority figures, constantly. You know, when he ran the money changers out of the temple and the merchants, because it wasn't just money changers anymore. See, what was supposed to happen is you couldn't buy, like, well, back in those days it was blood sacrifice. In fact, that's what Jesus did, is Jesus made a blood sacrifice of himself for us. But prior to Jesus doing what he did, the law was that blood had to be shed in atonement for sin. And that's actually still the law, but the thing is, Jesus' blood is sufficient to cover all sin in perpetuity. But prior to Jesus doing what he did, people had to buy sacrificial animals. And what was supposed to happen is you took your money, your street money, the money you earned from whatever job you did, down to the temple. When you figured you had built up enough sin that it was time to purge, you go down to the temple and you buy a sacrificial animal. These were pure animals. These were blessed animals. You could not pay for these animals with common street money, because the money you were paying for these animals, that coin that you gave for that animal, that might have been used to pay a prostitute. That might have been used to pay an assassin to murder somebody's enemy. They could have been used for any number of things. Like, how would you know? And so you had to pay for that animal with pure money that was uncontaminated, and that was called temple money. So just like when you visit another country, you change your currency, you go to the bank, and you hand them your local currency, and they give you a fistful of currency from that country that you can spend there. And they take a fee for doing so. Rocky's all agitated. He's been this way all night. But anyway, something did happen outside. There was even something out there messing with my door. I could hear it trying to get in here. So I don't know what it was or who it was, but there was somebody or something out there last night. And Rocky has been agitated ever since, anyway. But anyway, getting back to what I'm talking about, though, the way it worked is you had to trade your street money for temple money, and then you used the temple money to buy the sacrificial animal, who then the priest would sacrifice on your behalf. That's how it worked. Well, they were to be kept outside the temple. They were not to operate in the temple. But what had happened is they'd moved into the temple and they were paying rent to the temple authorities to occupy the temple, strictly against God's law. This was in defiance of God himself. That was never to happen. And not only that, but it had become a bazaar. It had become a marketplace. It wasn't just temple money, exchanging money and so on. It wasn't just that, Rocky. Oh, gosh. Anyway, it wasn't just temple money and buying sacrificial animals and so on. It was a flea market. You could buy everything and anything in there. It had become a marketplace, and that's what Jesus said. He said, "You've turned my Father's house into a marketplace." And he went in there and he overturned the tables and he went after them with a bullwhip, probably a bullwhip that was on one of the tables for sale, because, like I say, it had become a flea market, basically. It had become a bazaar, marketplace, whatever you want to call it, a trading post or whatever. That's what they had turned the temple into. All these merchants were paying rent to the temple authorities to do this. Oh my gosh, Rocky. Anyway, so my goodness. Anyway, so they had it in for Jesus. They really did. They were mad at him. How dare he do this? Who is this peasant to come in here and screw with us? We don't like that. Who is he to point out our corruption? Anyway, they used to come at him in different ways. They'd come at him. They'd say, well, so they'd have the perfect question, or so they thought. If he answers it this way, we got him for treason or insurrection or blasphemy. If he answers it this other way, it'll totally discredit him in front of his followers. Either way, he loses and we win. This was the idea. We can either charge him criminally and put him to death, or we can screw him up with his followers. So they'd go to him, and in front of everybody, they'd ask him the question, they'd put it to him, and he'd give them the perfect answer every time. An answer they couldn't use to further their agenda, but would further his agenda. You see. Oh, they hated him. They really did. But like I say, that experience I had on the side of the road with those two corrupt police officers, and how I saw that one, when I gave him the perfect answer, how he reacted. And like I say, I've only ever been smart enough to do it once. Jesus did it repeatedly. They were coming at him constantly with their stupidity. In my case, I only gave a perfect answer one time, but I saw how angry that made that police officer, and I saw the results of that for the next 2 years. That they showed me no mercy. I was harassed continuously, and they enlisted other police officers to harass me too. So it wasn't always them, it was others too, and I was continuously having accusations thrown at me. It just never seemed to end. It was constant. They were at my door. They were pulling me over in the car. I was threatened. I was told I had death threats from the police and everything else. I actually have had death threats from the OPP. Anyway, and that wasn't the first time either. I had death threats from them before that too, but that also started again and it ramped up. in a big way. I think that God must have protected me a lot of times. There's probably lots of times they would have killed me, but somehow God intervened and stopped it from happening. Anyway, this one time, though, that I did give the perfect answer, I saw how that corrupt authority figure reacted. Now, I believe that there's a lot of demonic activity around all this stuff, and I believe these corrupt police officers were inhabited with demons. And the thing about demons is they don't die, not like we do. They go on. But of course, the parasite, the host dies, but the parasite lives. The parasite lives on. It's got to find another host. And so I think that the same demons that were behind the persecution of Jesus are still out there operating, and they're just operating through other corrupt authority figures. Anyway, bottom line is, I may have encountered some of the same demons that persecuted Christ in those police officers. It's entirely possible. And I saw the reaction, when I gave that perfect answer. And the thing is, I'm sure Jesus saw that repeatedly, because he always gave the perfect answer. He wasn't a schmuck like me who just happened to luck into giving the perfect answer one time. He gave the perfect answer every time. And I'm sure that he experienced that same thing anyway. My goodness. He's really agitated, Something happened out there. And anyway, I'm going to have to go check it out soon. I also want to get the perf. I want to get to the fairgrounds before they go on the gates there, because I want to get in there and see if I can pick some cans and bottles. So I better get a move on. I'd better get moving. I better get going. Anyway, bottom line, I can see how the authorities in those days hated Jesus as much as they did. And I can see that whole process, how it unfolded, based upon what happened to me on the side of the road that day and what happened subsequent to that. Because believe me, I gave that cop a perfect answer, and I was made to pay for that repeatedly. And like I say, I saw how it deflated him, and then I saw how he came back up with anger. And see, that's the thing. That's what they did to Jesus. They came after Jesus. They said, well, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Now, they fought either way. We've got him, because if he says, yes, we should, he's betraying his people. He's betraying the Jewish people by saying they should pay taxes to their conqueror. But if he doesn't, if he says, no, we shouldn't, well, then he is inciting insurrection against Rome, against Caesar. So either way, we got him. Either he'll be discredited, and we can also charge him for actively going against us, our people, or he's an insurrectionist actively encouraging insurrection against Rome, which is also a death penalty thing. Either way, we got him. This is perfect. That's what they thought. So they go to Jesus and they put the question to him, of course, in front of all the people. All his followers were there, And Jesus says, do you have a coin? Yeah. Well, would you hand it to me, please? May I look at it? Well, certainly. The guy who asked the question handed Jesus the coin. Now, of course, they'd come at him feigning respect. They'd say, Rabbi, you're so wise. Please answer this question. But really, they were trying to frame him, is what they were doing. They were trying to frame him up. But anyway, so handed him the coin. Jesus had a look at it. He turned it over in his hand and looked at it. And then he held it out to the guy and he pointed at it. He said, whose image is this? on here, and the engraved on this coin. And the guy says, "Well, that's Caesar, of course." "Oh, Caesar. Okay. Whose name is this?" "Well, that's Caesar's name, of course." Jesus said, "Oh, okay. So it's got his image engraved on it, and it's got his name engraved on it. It must be his. Yeah, that's his property. That's Caesar's property. If Caesar asked you for his property, give it to him. It's his, after all. It's his property. Why would you deprive the man of his property?" And then he said, no, I'm paraphrasing here, but that's the gist of it. That's pretty much what he said. Didn't use the same words I'm using, but that was the message. It's got his image on it. It's got his name on it. It must be his. If he asks for it, give it to him. And then he said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to the Father what is the Father's. Perfect answer. Now, I'm darn sure that official who asked that question, who put that question to him, I'll bet he reacted just the way that police officer on the side of the road did that day with me. I'll bet it deflated him. And I'll bet then he got angry because, see, his pride wouldn't allow him to do anything but to get angry. How dare this peasant outsmart me? How dare this peasant answer me